Okay, so, the Battle of Bunker Hill, or shall we just say Breed's Hill. Following the beginning of the war at Lexington and Concord on April 19, 1775, the citizens of Boston found themselves split between two armies. General Artemus Ward's New England volunteers surrounded Boston and blockaded the surrounding land, while General Thomas Gage and 4,600 British soldiers held control of the city of Boston itself. The American colonists knew that this was a sign of war, for one Bostonian wrote, "We are besieged this moment with 10 or 15,000 men, from Roxbury to Cambridge. We are every hour expecting an attack by land or water." On June 15, 1775, the American colonists heard news that the British planned to control the Charlestown Peninsula between the Charles and Mystic Rivers. There are two hills located on this peninsula, one named Bunker's Hill and the other Breed's Hill. Both hills overlook both Boston and its harbor, making this a fantastic vantage point to have, whether it be under the control of the new American colonists or the British Army. Since the Americans knew that the Brits were going to attack, the colonists decided to act first to frustrate them. For this battle, on the American side, we have commanding Dr. Joseph Warren, Israel Putnam, Colonial Stark, providing reinforcements, and William Prescott. The Americans also have around 2,400 half-dash townsmen fighting for their lives. On the opposing side of the fight, the British have commanding Sir William Howe, and General Thomas Gage. British also have Navy ships docked within the Boston Harbor, armed with cannons, and about a tad more than 3,000 fully armed and trained British soldiers ready to rip the Americans apart. On the night of June 16th, Colonel William Prescott led 1,200 of his undisciplined, disobedient, and sometimes intoxicated soldiers up to fortify Bunker's Hill, the dominant hill in Charlestown, Boston. Prescott, however, ended up building a barricade on Breed's Hill. Some believe that Prescott had a faulty map or led his troops in a different direction due to the dark setting. The next morning, the British awoke to find Breed's Hill fortified with an earthen redoubt measuring a total of 160 feet by 30 feet high above their heads. The fact that the Americans were on elevated land looking over the hill gave them a tremendous advantage. Of course, the Brits were just an tiny bit mad about the Americans' masterpiece, as Major General William Howe knew that his men, when under command and control of Gage, would take up to 6 weeks for his boys to construct such a barricade. In dispute, British ships started firing their cannons into the hill and fortification. At this time, Charlestown was set aflame, burning as the battle progressed. Bostonians and other townspeople climbed up to their rooftops to watch the battle, and to cheer on their own men, of course. So, as the British ships were constantly hurtling cannonball after cannonball, they soon realized that their heavy lead balls of fury were not being as effective as they wished. In response to their first attempted failure, General Gage ordered men to try and take control of the hill. It took Gage a really long time to issue a command due to a shortage of boats and an unfavorable tide, all thanks to the water within Boston Harbor. When the British forces finally reached land on the peninsula, they proceeded to charge the Americans and their mound of protection. The British just expected to march up the hill and scare the colonists away. The British troops started walking up to the top of the hill in their neat, crisp lines, making a sea of little red old men. With bayonets fixed, why should some redcoats even bother to load their muskets with lead balls? The British troops, wearing their bright red, super obnoxious, heavy wool jackets, which were also weighed down by heavy equipment, marched up the grassy hill, trying to dodge the fallen stones and bricks hidden beneath their feet. As the colonists saw this massive red line approach them, slowly but steadily, they remained calm and did not open fire. The American colonists waited so long because their general, Colonel Prescott, has been said to have given the famous order, "Don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes." The reason why Prescott enforced this command was because 1. The colonists had very little ammo, so every shot count, and 2. To keep the colonists within their muskets' available and effective shooting range. Once the British came within that visible range, the colonists began firing, and the British started dying. Or falling, for that matter. Soon enough, the Brits were driven back down to the bottom of the hill, and the Americans were victorious. But not for long. The British came back up a second time, marching up the hill in their pristine lines, except this time, Gage sent in even more troops as a reinforcement to once again attempt to conquer the hill. The American soldiers aimed their muskets low, shooting the chest and lower body, causing the Brits to trample to the ground when shot. This helped in preserving the ammo, for missed shots to the head was a loss in a musket ball and black powder for the colonists. Once again, the Americans forced the British back down to the bottom of the hill, for a second time. The British generals were angry and frustrated about the American success so far in the battle, but were not going to let them win. On the British's final thrust forward, they were able to withstand the colonist rebellion. At this time, colonists barely had any ammunition or supplies left. Men started to hurl rocks into the British crowd as they ran up the hill in their lines of red. Some of the American men fled at this point, while other brave soldiers stayed to guard the valuable hill. Dr. Warren told his men that the only way that they would gain freedom was if they fought for it. The British cut through the breastworks and overran the redoubt from 3 sides. Colonel Stark managed to hold on at the rail fence on the side of the hill with reinforcements on the Americans' part, long enough to help cover Prescott's retreat. Soon enough, the British broke through the wall, protecting the American colonists, aiming their bayonets and firing their muskets at all the American militia. Here's where the Americans, lacking hand-to-hand combat skills, were dominated by the British's fancy spear attachments on their guns. Now, almost all of the colonists fled back up the peninsula since it was their only escape route, while the infiltrating forces were killing their honorable comrades who were left behind. At the end of the day, the British conquered Breed's and Bunker's Hill. Even though the British claimed the land and counted the gain as a victory, it came at a deadly cost. The British suffered from about 1,000 150 soldiers killed and wounded, the British troops were no longer fresh or overconfident, instead deeply frustrated. On the other hand, the American casualties were estimated at only 450 killed and wounded. This is a dramatic difference, a huge loss for Britain, and a spark of hope for the American colonists. For both sides, the Battle of Bunker Hill was the start of a journey in military education. The Brits came to realize that their frontal attacks were not very effective. The Americans had proved to themselves and the rest of the world that they could stand up to the British Army in traditional open field combat. The Battle of Bunker Hill was important for a variety of reasons. The first one being was that it was the first true battle of the Revolutionary War. It showed that both sides of this war were not going to fall easily, for each force fought with pride and determination. This simply foreshadowed that it was going to be a very long, close war. Another important point this battle drew was that it allowed the American troops to actually see that the British Army was not invincible. The aftermath of how many killed on the American side versus how many killed on the British side brought confidence to the Americans as a whole, as they did have a chance. Forever it be remembered that the Battle of Bunker Hill, which actually took place on Breed's Hill, was the cornerstone of the American Revolution and the foundation of hope upon defeating the British to form a new, free nation.